Usually around this time of year, every movie critic in the nation releases a top 5 or a top 10 list for all the films that were released the previous year. I felt as though it would be kind of droll for me to do that, because frankly, what hasn't been said about all the films I've loved this year? So I could make a top 5 list, but it would be kind of pointless, because pretty much every top 5 list this year is going to be the same. So, breaking away from the norm, I decided to make a bottom 5 of 2009. The following list is what I personally believe to be the worst films of 2009. The absolute bottom of the barrel. Now there's a few films I want to mention before I post my bottom 5 of 2009. These are my honorable mentions. Or I should say dishonorable mentions. The first and foremost being X-Men Origins Wolverine. I could not stand this movie when I first saw it. However, going back and looking at it again, I can see how some people could have enjoyed it. My opinions still haven't changed on the film. I still hate it. But over time, I saw how people might have been able to enjoy it. Another film that deserves a dishonorable mention would be G-Force. Now, I know what some of you are saying. Oh, it's a kid's film. Cut it some slack. No. In this day and age, when we have very, very good children's films being released, I am going to hold every children's film to the standard of the others. So I can't just give any children's film a pass. When I've seen films put out by Pixar that are absolutely beautiful, I'm going to hold every children's film to that standard. So, G-Force does not live up to that standard, or any standard for films. It was crap. Now, because it is a children's film, I'm not going to be putting it in my top 5. But I just want to remind you all that it was a piece of crap. Another film that deserves a dishonorable mention is Street Fighter: The Legend of Chun-Li. I don't really know what to say about this movie other than it sucked, but I will say one thing before moving on. I would never, ever recommend that any of you watch any of these movies I'm mentioning on this list, but I will point out one thing if any of you do happen to catch this movie. Half of the cast for this movie is taking the movie seriously, and the other half is making the film into a satire. Why the directors and screenwriters decided to go down that road is beyond me. To have half of the cast take the movie seriously, and the other half make it into a joke, makes no damn sense. One other movie I'll mention before I give you my list is Obsessed. Long story short, this movie was just a way for Beyoncé to get herself out there in a more serious role. At least that's what she thought she was doing. What she was really doing was just a massive joke. So now, onto my list. Number 5. Knowing. I got a lot of hateful messages about me posting a bad review for this movie. I want to clarify a couple things about it. First, my stance towards this film is still the same. I couldn't stand it then, I can't stand it now. However, if you took something good away from this movie, I'm happy for you. I have spoken to several people who have seen this movie, and they have told me that the overall messages and morals put forth by this movie outweigh all of the bad writing and bad dialogue and bad acting. While I'm glad they took a good message away from the film, the movie is really poorly written. Imagine if the Bible had been written like this: I am God, I art good, look at me, ha ha ha. If the Bible was written like that, no one could take a good message away from it. The same applies to this movie. It was written so badly that hardly anyone could take a good message away from it. Now, if you could get a good message from the movie, good for you. But there are so many other shortcomings that it does not make up for a good message delivered in the end. Number 4. The Uninvited. This is another movie that I did not do a video review for. However, this movie really pissed me off. I'm not going to give away the ending of this movie, but the ending to the Uninvited is quite possibly the most infuriating ending I have ever seen in a movie. I will say that there is a twist at the end of this movie, and that twist is one of the most moronic things I have ever seen in a movie. It is not a twist, it is a complete change of the plot. They rewrote the entire story at the end to make it seem as though it was a twist when it was really just the screenwriters writing themselves into a corner. They obviously had no idea where to go, and they made this complete douchebag of an ending. And I hate to tell you, but I could never feel sympathetic or threatened by the girl from Lemony Snicket's. Number 3, Year One. This was an abomination of film. I walked out of this movie angry, like I wanted to punch a little kitten angry. Unlike some of the other movies I've mentioned so far in this video, this is one that I doubt anyone could enjoy. There was no good message to take away from this movie. There was nothing at all to take away from this movie except anger. And despite having a very good comedic cast, every joke fell flat for me in that movie. Number 2, Old Dogs. I just posted my video for this movie a couple of weeks ago, and let me tell you, it still angers me. Just thinking about some of the jokes that were thrown out in this movie infuriates me. And, just like Year One, this movie did have a very good comedic cast. Outside of Robin Williams and John Travolta, you had people like Seth Green, Justin Long, Matt Dillon, who I found very funny in the past, but they were terrible in this. How they can get such a good cast of actors into one film and then completely screw it up is beyond me. Yet another example that it's not as simple as just putting good actors on a screen. You need to write it! And finally, the worst film of 2009 is Dragon Ball Evolution. Any of you who have watched my reviews from this year probably saw this coming. I have been mentioning how bad this movie has been all year, and it still infuriates me about how bad this movie was. Now, for the last couple days, I've been tossing back and forth in my mind which film should have been the worst. Should it have been Old Dogs or Dragon Ball Evolution? Both could easily be the worst on anyone's list. The reason I picked Dragon Ball Evolution is because it preyed on a lot of fans. There was a huge fan base that went in to see this movie and was really upset. Old Dogs doesn't really have a fan base, unless you call people who saw Wild Hogs a fan base, which I really don't. But Dragon Ball Evolution preyed on that fan base, hoping that people would go into the movie just because of the name. And for that reason, I placed the movie the worst on my list. Now, luckily for most moviegoers, there were just as many good films that came out this year as there were bad films. These are just an example of the few bad ones. Don't interpret this video as me saying that I've lost faith in Hollywood. I still think there is tons of good material in Hollywood, and there were many good films that came out this year. However, the films I have just mentioned are a perfect example that some executives, some producers, some directors have good movie making as the last thing on their minds. Let's hope by next year this list will be a bit shorter. Until then, Happy New Year and take care.